Ron, one of the recurring themes on your show is the future of the professions, and I know you've been heavily influenced by the work of father and son team Richard and Daniel Susskind. Why do you think the professions are so ripe for change?
The professions, the idea of moving into a post-professional society fascinates me, where they would have much less power than they do. Let's face it, society has granted the professions enormous monopoly power. Now, economists hate monopolies. They don't innovate, they charge high prices, they keep quality up, but they don't serve the great masses well. And so with these new platforms, with new technology, AI, deep learning, Watson, Ross in the legal sector, I mean, we can go on and on. To the extent that this technology diminishes the monopoly power of professions, I'm all for it.
The Suskins talk about this sort of grand bargain that...
Yes. And it's not so grand, and it's no bargain.
Well, so talk about that. What do they mean when they talk about that bargain?
They mean the monopoly power that we grant to lawyers or doctors, only they can practice medicine. It'd be like saying only taxi cab drivers can drive people, right? There'd be no Uber, there'd be no innovation. And let's face it, the professions are not hotbeds of innovation. And the rest of the world is, and here we are succumbing to these professions, and it's a human construct, meaning we put this in place, meaning we should be able to dismantle it.
So what's your view of the world in that post, how long will it take us to get to a post-professional world, and who will be the great winners and losers from that wave of change?
I don't know how long it will take, and neither do the Suskins. They don't put a timeline on it. Although I will say I spoke to Daniel about this when I had dinner with him, and he said he's more pessimistic. He's on the pessimistic side, meaning he thinks it's going to happen faster than anybody thinks. So I'm not sure how long, and I don't know who the winners are going to be, but I know that it's not just going to be the professions. It could be somebody like Google, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, who knows who's going to own some of these platforms that are going to give people access to the expertise that now they have to go seek from a professional.
You rattled off a few technologies there. So Ross in the legal sector, Watson, which is IBM's...
Ross is Watson's little brother.
Yeah. Who I think Ross is running a whole insolvency practice, is that right?
Baker Hofstadler's insolvency practice, yeah.
Yeah, so really there's no human being lawyers in that insolvency practice?
I'm not sure if it knocked them all out, but it probably greatly reduced them.
Watson is an artificial intelligence that is the focal point of what IBM's doing.
Yeah.
I know you've had a lot of conversations about blockchain and how impactful that will be. Why do you think these technologies are the enablers of radical change in a way that, say the mobile phone or other technologies haven't been?
Wow, well, I think the mobile phone actually enabled all of these things. I mean, that's what's making the blockchain so revolutionary, because of the great mobile phone technology. If we didn't have mobile phones, we couldn't have a blockchain. The idea that you can bank 6 billion people in the world with the blockchain is great. It's going to lift people out of poverty, give them access to credit, give them access to capital, to start businesses, all of that. I just think it's wonderful. I think the blockchain is probably the greatest single idea to come down the pike in the last 50 years.
It's kind of hard to understand, and you've had 2 shows, I think, talking about how blockchain works, and many people that we talk to who are clients and service providers, I think, also feel like they struggle to understand it. Where would you suggest we go if we want to try and get our hands around an understanding of these things?
Simple book is Don and Alex Tapscott, another father and son team. They wrote the blockchain revolution, and I pick up that book and read it, and that'll give you a great overview without being very technical, because it can get very wonkish very rapidly.
One of the things I really like about your analysis of the world is that technology is great, but innovation really is about business model change, and that if you embrace the technology in the absence of innovative thinking more broadly about your business, you probably won't make the most of it or make that great leap. Right. What would be your comment on that?
I learned that from, of all places, Andy Grove, the founder of Intel, who said disruptive threats don't come from technology, they come from new business models. And here's a guy who walked into Intel one day and said, we're no longer a memory chip company, we're now a semiconductor company. He took a $1 billion business, brought it to zero like that, because he said, if we're going to be cannibalized, better to dine with friends, meaning we have to cannibalize ourselves, otherwise somebody else will do it. Imagine if taxis or banks or other entities had that attitude, they'd be a lot more innovative. But the hardest place to innovate a new business model is from an old one. That's why most disruption comes from the outside.
And what are the disruptive business models that you're seeing that we should be paying attention to?
Uber, Airbnb, the blockchain. I think we've got $1 billion in venture capital going into blockchain. I think that's going to be incredibly disruptive to a whole lot of industries, like put the auditors on top. And bookkeepers and accountants. If there's a distributed public ledger that's time-stamped and can be verified, why do I need an accountant?
It strikes me that we get very concerned about a low growth world. So as financial advisors, we look ahead and there's lots of forecasts of there being low economic growth. But one of the things that I've heard you talk about that I really strongly agree with is sometimes we don't measure things very well. So the way we measure output is a very old-fashioned approach. And that, take Uber or Airbnb, for example, there's this huge new business opportunity, but there hasn't been more infrastructure investment. So all of the things you would traditionally associate with valuing a business is absent from that business model.
Now, that's a great point, because Airbnb doesn't own one hotel room, Uber doesn't own one car. So, economists have always been good. When we talk about creative destruction, economists are great at measuring the destruction. They're not so great at measuring the creativity.
So in your mind, when you look at the next 10, 15, 20 years, are you pessimistic about the future or optimistic?
No, I'm incredibly optimistic. I'm probably the opposite of Daniel Susskind, which is why it was such an interesting conversation to have with him. I believe work is worship. And now whether that's religious, spiritual, however you want to think about, but I think we're always going to find a way. We humans are always going to find a way to service one another.
Well, we are certainly optimistic people ourselves, so
Good.
it's wonderful to have another voice out in the wilderness who's not talking about low interest rates and low growth.
Doom and gloom, no jobs.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't buy any of it.
I think misinterpreting and sometimes misreporting what the state of the world actually is in terms of how much violence there is, how much destruction there is. Actually, there's lots to be positive about. So,
and there's a ton of abundance. I mean, Deirdre McCloskey calls it the great enrichment. We're so wealthy compared to our ancestors. They wouldn't understand the world we live in, and I think a lot of times we take it for granted.
Well, and I love that comment of yours, which is, you wouldn't trade being, someone, almost anyone today, anywhere in the world, to be, a member of King James's court.
Right. I'd rather be poor today anywhere in the world than rich, even with Bill Gates' money 200 years ago.
So I really thank you for being that positive voice, and it's lovely to meet you in person.
Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate it.